horrifying, disturbing things will be shown in the video. So take this warning as a sign to scroll off the video.
23 accidents, 7 levels. This iceberg features some of the most horrifying talent show accidents ever aired. We'll start with some unsettling incidents, but the deeper we go, the more grotesque it gets. So, let's start at the tip of this iceberg. Level 1, the catch. During the America's Got Talent audition, a salsa dance suddenly came to a stop. Seminea was a 4-member Latin dance group performing a high-risk routine, salsa, mixed with acrobatic lifts and aerial catches. Everything was flawless for nearly half a minute until the unimaginable happened.
9.
One of the male dancers, Louis, attempted to catch his partner's full weight, but it was clear something strange was happening to his leg. Before anyone could fully understand, Louis collapsed, clutching his leg, unable to stand. Meanwhile, the other duo kept performing. Finally, the performance stopped. Eventually, Louis was brought backstage with medics rushed in.
I think someone got hurt.
Can we check that the other guy is actually okay?
Is he okay?
This might even get injuries restricted, by the way.
Oh my God, he hurt himself.
The doctors later reported that he had buckled his knee while trying to balance his partner's weight. But the judges offered the remaining dancers a choice: leave or perform without him.
Want to strengthen your math and computer science skills? Try Brilliant. It's an effective and fun way to learn, built for the...
Without him.
We've been talking, we want to present to you a few options. Either you can figure out who wants to do the performance and come back to us, either later on today, or you can just wait for your friend to get better and maybe come back next year, because we want to give you a fair judgment and a fair chance at this. And unfortunately, your friend injured himself, so we don't want to judge on what we just saw.
They chose to perform, even after their friend was stretchered off with a dislocated knee and tearful eyes, and it paid off. The judges were so impressed by their resilience that they voted the remaining trio through to the next round.
Why do all these
The Ladder
scary
Act.
things?
In 2015's America's Got Talent semifinals, a ladder balancing act went horribly wrong in front of a live audience. Uzair Nozrazov was performing a Charlie Chaplin-inspired routine, climbing a freestanding ladder while catching rings and hoops. He had already impressed the crowd with sear wheel spins and precision climbs. And talent shows thrive on exactly these kinds of life-threatening spectacles. However, after the initial low-risk acts came the final stunt, balancing at the very top of a 15-foot-high, wobbly, unsupported ladder. From there, Uzier had to hook a hoop under his foot while perched at the very top. But before he could secure his position, the ladder tipped backward, and the very thing everyone feared became reality. A man performing for millions just plummeted 15 feet onto solid ground. It was a shocking moment that left him physically and mentally devastated. But just seconds after hitting the floor, Uzier sat up, visibly shaken, and immediately begged for another chance. His expression clearly depicted what he was feeling. The embarrassment of failing on live television and the fear that his one shot was slipping away. However, the judges refused.
You know what? Thank God you're okay. We don't have another 90 seconds because other contestants have to come out. Other contestants have to come out. Sorry.
Well, let's put it this way.
Due to limited time slots, they just didn't have 90 seconds more to spare. 4 years later, Uzier returned to AGT Champions and performed the exact same stunt on a ladder of the exact same height in front of Simon Cowell. But despite nailing the stunt, he was eliminated that night by the superfan vote. Acid Roulette. On January 11th, 2015, Chan Tan Pat sat on the Vietnam's Got Talent semi-final stage with 5 covered cups in front of him. 4 were filled with water, 1 contained sulfuric acid, but Phat didn't know which one. He called the act Acid Russian Roulette with one simple rule: drink from 4 cups, avoid the one that could dissolve his throat from the inside. But first, he had to prove the acid was real. That same liquid was now hidden in one of 5 identical cups, and millions were about to watch a man bet his mouth on intuition. The show labeled it, "Don't try this at home." However, the irony was impossible to ignore. After all, they were broadcasting it as entertainment. A judge shuffled the cups while Phat looked away, and the game began. Glass 5, safe. Glass 1, Phat had just accidentally tasted sulfuric acid. It was clear that the chemical had begun its work immediately, but instead of rushing him to medical care, the audience applauded. And that wasn't even the most disturbing part. Knowing that his internals could be pretty much getting slowly dissolved, Phat still didn't stop. Whether it was shock, embarrassment, or the pressure of live television, he picked up the remaining 3 glasses and drank them one by one, the acid clearly searing his lips and tongue. By the time Phat finished, he could barely speak. The performer later admitted his biggest fear in that moment wasn't death, it was that his career might be over. He was ultimately rushed to the hospital with first-degree burns and reportedly took 10 days to recover. Level 2, the water cell. Spencer Orsman was 2 minutes underwater with 50 pounds of chains dragging him to the bottom when his fingers stopped working. The 29-year-old escape artist had already picked 10 locks, but the 11th... wouldn't budge, and his lungs were running out of time. This insane act was a modern version of Houdini's water cell.
Going in. Start counting. Start counting. Oh, yeah.
The chains around him were 25 feet long with 8 steel padlocks, Smith & Wesson handcuffs, and ankle shackles. And that wasn't all. Once inside, a steel-reinforced lid was lowered and locked with 4 more padlocks. The average person can hold their breath for 30 to 60 seconds. Spencer had to hold his for nearly 4 minutes. And he also had to pick every lock during it. This was slow shuffling, packaged as entertainment, while audiences paid to watch him gamble his lungs against a stopwatch. But the New Jersey performance wasn't the first time Spencer had been locked in a water cage to entertain an audience. The eccentric man had done it before, so he already knew exactly how the stunt could go wrong. Just 3 months earlier during a rehearsal, he pushed past the 4-minute mark with 2 locks still remaining. Instead of signaling for help, he kept going until he blacked out underwater, still chained inside the tank. The crew had to pull him out unconscious. And even before that, on America's Got Talent, Spencer had barely escaped in time.
Oh my goodness! Spencer Horseman has done it!
You're telling me there is
So when he climbed back into the tank for a live performance in New Jersey, there was only one question in the audience's mind: will he survive this time? The first 2 minutes went smoothly. Ankles unshackled, wrists unlocked, 3 locks removed from the lid. By now, Spencer had already held his breath longer than most people ever will in their entire lives. And he still had 1 lock standing between him and oxygen. Spencer was now trapped in a 105-degree water because of faulty equipment, fingers too numb to grip, lungs screaming after nearly 3 minutes without air. By the time the crew dragged him from the tank, Spencer was disoriented, shaking, and barely conscious. The crew strapped him to a stretcher and transported him to the hospital, where doctors later revealed he had suffered brain damage from the ordeal.
So everybody wants to know how you're feeling right now. What's going on?
Mainly tired, worn out, haven't eaten, thirsty. But doctors told me I need to be here, keep on evaluation, since I did black out.
It was the second time in 3 months he had nearly performing the exact same stunt. Spencer, I am sure that you are better at doing that than 99.999% of all people. But it sounds like you need to be just a little bit better. Please don't do it anymore. Blindfolded crossing. Isakire Wubulaikasimu was 30 meters from the finish line when his legs started shaking and the wire beneath him began to sway. He had been walking backward for nearly 50 minutes, blindfolded across a ravine 200 meters deep. Isakire was a sixth-generation tightrope performer attempting to cross 700 meters of open air at Shinuzai Geopark. His only safety equipment was a long balancing pole.
从小开始练到就是练出来以前不带过线，以后也不带过线。现在很多那个对方他们要求带过线，就怕被线出事，我们就不喜欢带过线。
The stunt was broadcast live on Chinese television, and a crowd gathered below to watch. There was no room for a mistake. Around the 50-minute mark, however, conditions started turning against him. Heat was causing dizziness, and the wind was destabilizing the wire. Isakire later admitted he hadn't eaten enough before the attempt. Just 30 meters from the finish line, his body started failing him. He was so close to making it after such a long struggle, but then he slipped. Isakire plummeted 200 meters into the ravine below, the equivalent of a 60-story building. But against all odds, he didn't die. The man crashed through tree branches and bamboo forest, which absorbed just enough impact to keep him alive. Rescuers later found him with only minor injuries. And yet, despite such a traumatic experience, Isakire went on to set multiple Guinness World Records.
下一代的小孩们叫他们也传下去，我们做了。
including the record of the fastest 100-meter tightrope walk. Sounds like he also set a record for best fall into a ravine. Good gosh.
So many people trust iHerb for their health and wellness products. Simple. We guarantee freshness. Buy direct from manufacturers and ship fast to your doorstep. So, fitness fanatics, stretchaholics, immunity boosters.
Second chance. In 2019, Spanish illusionist Pedro Volta stepped into a water tank on Spain's Got Talent. He was straitjacketed, padlocked, and sent underwater with the tank locked from above. Pedro's act was an homage to Houdini. Escape the straitjacket underwater, then unlock the padlock, sealing the tank before your oxygen runs out. At 30 seconds, Pedro freed his left arm and worked on the strap under his legs. At 1 minute, the host reminded everyone that medical services should move closer. Every second was now vital. At 1 minute and 30 seconds, Pedro was still struggling with the second padlock. But what the audience didn't know was that they were watching a man return to the exact thing that had killed him 1 year earlier. In 2018, during a magic festival in Madrid, Pedro had attempted the same escape. But at the time, a strap got caught. He quickly lost focus, yet instead of aborting, he pushed through. Pedro's body eventually collapsed and stopped moving underwater. And while Pedro was half dead inside the tank, the crowd kept filming and cheering, and the medics stood still. no one could tell if the struggle was part of the act or if they were watching someone die. By the time paramedics reached him, Pedro had been in cardiorespiratory arrest for 4 minutes, clinically dead. But they resuscitated him on the spot. And yet, 1 year later, Pedro climbed back into the same tank to confront what almost killed him. Only now, the stakes were different. Instead of a small festival crowd, a panel of celebrity judges, a packed studio audience, and millions watching from home surrounded him. If something went wrong, the whole world would see it happen. And something did go wrong. Again, Pedro failed to open the second padlock. After more arduous struggle, Pedro gave up on the lock. The panic was breaking through his face, coupled with the agony of his lungs giving out, and the humiliation of failing in front of the entire world once again. Pedro survived, but this time he decided to stop performing that stunt. It took dying once and nearly twice for the persistent performer to finally give up. The shows so far were dangerous, but in the next level, things are about to cross all human limits. So hit the subscribe button and buckle up. Level 3. The 22-car jump. Harley Davidson, or Bubba Blackwell, was a world record jumper and professionally known as the American Daredevil. On July 4th, 2001, he launched off a ramp in front of 35,000 spectators at the Del Mar Fairgrounds, and never made it to the landing. Amid laser entrances, pyrotechnics, speeches, and wheelies to hype the crowd, Bubba mounted a Harley-Davidson XR750, the same motorcycle the legendary American stunt performer Evel Knievel used for his legendary jumps. That night, he was attempting to break Knievel's car jumping record. 22 cars lined the track. A 7-foot ramp stood at the end. But there was a problem. The venue was a horse racing track, and the surface was softer than standard stunt terrain. The unstable ground made Bubba hesitant, but when he saw the crowd was chanting his name in anticipation, he went for it. After a quick prayer, Harley accelerated in 4th gear toward the ramp, but his trajectory was too low. He came up short, struck the edge of the landing deck instead of clearing it, and was thrown violently over the handlebars. Bubba was unresponsive, blood pouring from his head and ears, body completely still. Paramedics reached him within moments, and Bubba was eventually airlifted in a comatose condition. Miraculously, Bubba survived, and later he described what exactly happened to him that day.
Pretty clear that I wasn't going fast enough, and if I had it to do over again, I would have traction down to make sure it'd be okay.
Still, Bubba returned to stunt riding just 2 years later, and by 2008, he wasn't just jumping 22 cars anymore, he cleared 52, more than double the record that nearly killed him. 1 centimeter. During a Cirque du Soleil show in Portland, Oregon, an aerialist was spinning at high speeds, 20 feet above the stage, with no safety net. And suddenly, the worst happened. The aerialist was Maria Konfliktova, who holds a Guinness World Record for the most aerial hoop rotations in 30 seconds. On August 24th, 2024, Maria was performing her
I really like life simulation games with building method.
signature routine. However, no one knew that something had already gone wrong before she even started spinning. The hoop she was spinning on had a 1 centimeter misalignment. Now, it may not sound like much, but in the physics of a high-speed spin, 1 centimeter is a meter, and that's all it takes to alter everything. Before anyone could react, Maria hit the stage. She may have had all her weight on the same foot at that point. Meanwhile, the man nearby just stood there in shock at first. When help finally reached her, Maria was still somewhat conscious, lifting her head slightly. They transported her off stage and rushed her to the hospital. The internal damage was severe.
Yeah, so Maria Konvaktova is stable, she's conscious, and she's being cared for by medical specialists, according to a spokesperson for CERT.
She had suffered multiple fractures, significant facial trauma, and needed major surgeries.
She came down face down. It appeared like she hit her nose. There was blood from her nose. She lifted her head up, but she stayed still.
Despite everything, Maria Konvaktova eventually made a full recovery and returned to performing a few months later.
I love adrenaline. I love when I'm scared, but now, like, each time, like, oh my God, and like I think about stuff.
Surprisingly, she's still doing the same routine that nearly killed her. Hopefully with no more misalignments. Wheel of Destiny. It was July 21st, 2021 at the Barnstable County Fair in Massachusetts. A performer was balancing on a massive rotating structure called the Wheel of Destiny when everything went haywire. The act is exactly what the name suggests. Performers balance, jump, and run on a spinning wheel 30 feet in the air with no safety net or harness. That day, the man on the wheel was Cyrus Knock, a 9th-generation circus performer from the famous Daredevil dynasty, the Nerveless Knocks. Some viewers initially thought it was part of the show until he slammed into the second part of the structure and fell hard onto the ground. A doctor in the audience rushed to help. However, the injuries needed greater medical attention, so they rushed him to the nearest hospital.
Collapsed lung, cracked 3 ribs, crushed vertebrae, and a little crack in my spine.
In the meantime, the audience shared some really disturbing views. Despite the horrifying incident, the performer was released from the hospital just 3 days later. Within 3 weeks, he was back on tour, helping behind the scenes, and 2 months after the fall, Cyrus was performing live again. You might say it was his destiny. No helmet. On Turkey's Got Talent, a performer was about to attempt a high-speed rollerblade jump off a ramp on live television. The performer was Harun, a member of Mersin Extreme, a Turkish acrobatics group. The man had no helmet, no protective gear, just the stage, the ramp, and whatever landing he could manage. And with that list of risks and dangers combined, the result was disastrous. He landed hard on his back and neck, missing the mat entirely. Within seconds, his body went stiff in an awkward angle. However, the most disturbing part was that the judges sat there. The audience watched, and no one moved. In fact, it wasn't the medical team who rushed in first. It was his teammates, backstage staff, and other competitors. Eventually, a neck brace was placed on him, confirming what everyone already feared. And this entire time, the cameras never cut away, not even when they put him on the stretcher. Harun was carried off to an ambulance, but luckily, he didn't suffer any serious long-term injuries. Still, the question nobody could answer remained. Why didn't the production require him to wear any protective equipment in the first place? Level 4. The Failed Net. At the Great Moscow State Circus, an acrobat dove from 85 feet as part of the finale. But the landing wasn't what anyone had expected. The acrobat was Karo Christopher Kazungu, a Kenyan performer and part of a 12-person aerial act. The maneuver was called the drop, a stunt that required him to free fall from nearly 26 meters and land precisely in the center of a safety net. The staff ensured everything was rigorously tested, but as Kazungu's body hit the exact center of the net, instead of catching him, the net tore open on impact. Kazungu plummeted through the hole, striking the arena floor at full speed. Medics rushed in within seconds, and Kazungo was rushed to intensive care in critical condition. Meanwhile, the circus director held a press conference confirming the net was German-made and had passed all inspections. So investigators began looking into sabotage and manufacturing defects, but no conclusive cause was ever determined. Kazungu survived, eventually regaining mobility after months of rehabilitation, but he never performed again.
Nekas tā neattīra kā micelārais ūdens. 80% piekrīt, ka tas ir labākais veids, kā attīrīt jutīgu ādu. No Garnier.
Again. 45 feet. At the 2007 X Games, a skateboarder fell 45 feet onto a wooden ramp, hitting so hard that his shoes flew off his feet, and then stood up and walked away. But something tragic was waiting for him. The skateboarder was Jake Brown, and he was attempting something no one had ever landed in big air competition: a 720-degree spin off the mega ramp, an 84-foot drop, a 70-foot gap, and a quarter pipe that would launch him 4 stories into the air.
What do you think we can expect from Jake right now? He's going for the 720 to a big 540.
Jake had never landed the trick before, and there's no way to practice falling from that height. The first part went perfectly. Jake cleared the gap, executed the 720, and began his descent toward the quarter pipe. But then his board started to wobble. At the peak of his arc, 18 feet above the lip of the ramp, the board kicked out from under him. Jake was now 45 feet in the air with no safety net beneath him. He didn't hit the curved transition designed to catch skaters and slammed straight down onto the flat.
It's a 20. Oh, he's
gone! Jake lay motionless. Fellow skater Jason Ellis, watching from the sidelines, thought he was...
The way that his body accordioned and his shoes flew off, and I mean, looked like he must have snapped his neck, snapped his leg. It's unbelievable. I wouldn't have survived, no way.
Meanwhile, the commentators went silent. For 2 full minutes, no one knew if Jake was breathing, and then he suddenly pushed himself up onto his own 2 feet and walked off the ramp to a standing ovation.
Are you kidding me? There's no way he could be standing up from that. Unbelievable.
However, at the hospital, doctors found a fractured wrist, a fractured vertebrae, a lacerated liver, a bruised lung, and a severe concussion. That same night, still injured, Jake showed up to the after party with a cane.
A couple dudes are like, you should have been and stuff, and I'm like, well, I'm not.
And 3 years later, he returned to the same ramp, same event, with the same trick, and took the gold. The Pyramid. In February 2017, 8 members of the Flying Wallendas were rehearsing an 8-person pyramid on a high wire in Sarasota, Florida. There was no safety net beneath them. The performers were members of the Flying Wallendas, a 7th-generation circus family known for one defining tradition: no nets. But that practice hadn't gone so well for them in the past. In 1962, the Wallendas were performing their signature 7-person pyramid at Detroit when the formation collapsed. 2 performers were killed, and a third, Mario Wallenda, was paralyzed for life.
When it collapsed in Detroit, that was a real eye-opener for everybody, public as well as performers. And public were finally aware of how dangerous circus work is.
Still, the family never stopped performing, but they dropped the pyramid from the act until February 2017. 55 years later, the new generation planned to bring it back. And this time, the formation included 8 people instead of 7. A world record attempt and a way to close the door on that dreadful chapter of their history. They were 25 feet in the air, 3 tiers of performers balanced on bars, shoulders, and a single wire. But then, someone shifted. In a multi-person pyramid, one movement travels through the entire structure. There's no recovering once the balance breaks. Before anyone could react, 5 performers fell. 3 managed to grab the wire on the way down. Nick Walenda's sister, Lijana, hit the concrete face first. She broke every bone in her face.
I broke every bone in my face, and so they had to put it all back together with 3 plates and 72 screws in my face.
Meanwhile, his Aunt Rietta landed on her back and was never able to walk properly again. Nick later admitted he even considered quitting because of how hard that time was. Still, despite the catastrophic sequence of events, there was a comeback.
During that accident, I caught the wire and held on, but after that started experiencing fear, it became more real than ever before. We don't give up. We go through trials, we go through tragedies, but there's triumph at the end.
2 years later, Lijana walked again across Times Square with Nick, 25 stories above the street. Death dive. At the top of Minnehaha Falls in Sydney, an Australian diver stood 42.5 meters above the water, the height of a 13-story building. Meet Vali Graham, who is about to attempt a world record death dive. Now, death diving, or dodging, is exactly what the name suggests. Jumpers launch themselves from extreme heights, hold a spread eagle position for as long as possible, then curl into a safe entry at the last second.
Isn't it annoying that the coolest content in games is always locked behind a paywall?
Yeah.
Get Cash Giraffe, the ultimate gaming companion. Grant access, and Cash Giraffe will scan your device for games.
Sorry.
But one wrong move, and there's nothing safe about that entry. Because at 42.5 meters, the water's surface tension can hit like concrete.
Way up there, that's their takeoff point. That's their landing area. I'm thinking I go right there, which will be perfect.
The record at the time was 42.5 meters, held by Swiss diver Lucien Charlon. Vali wanted to beat it. So on June 11th, 2025, he jumped. And he hit the water wrong. His friends watching from below saw him disappear beneath the surface. And for a moment, there was nothing. Then he resurfaced, conscious but bleeding from his ear. However, what happened next is what makes the incident truly disturbing. At the hospital, scans revealed the full damage: fractured skull, shattered vertebrae, broken sternum, burst eardrum, and concussion. That means Vali had climbed out of the water, then hiked 1.2 kilometers up a steep trail to reach his friend's car, all with a shattered spine. The human body isn't supposed to do that. Adrenaline can mask pain, but it doesn't rebuild vertebrae. Every step Vali took was a step that could have paralyzed him permanently. Surgeons operated immediately, followed by weeks of rehabilitation. And only 2 days after surgery, Vali posted an update, walking again. Vali technically broke the record, but he also broke nearly everything else. Level 5, buried alive. In 1992, an escape artist was buried alive under 7 tons of dirt and cement in Indianapolis. It was 2 years to the day after another performer died attempting the exact same stunt. October 31st, 1990, amateur magician Joe Barris climbed into a plastic coffin at a family fun center in Fresno, California. 7 tons of wet cement were poured on top. The coffin imploded instantly, crushing Burris to death in front of his own family.
Despite the efforts of his crew, it was too late. Joe was crushed, and with him died his dream of being the next Houdini. He died there in that coffin of his own making.
Even Houdini had refused to perform the buried alive trick in 1915. He deemed the stunt too dangerous. 2 years later, escape artist Bill Shirk decided to try that stunt again. He scheduled the stunt for October 31st, 1992 at Houdini's 66th death anniversary. But in the documentary filmed that day, Shirk admitted something chilling right before climbing into the coffin. Police regulation handcuffs clicked around his wrists, 30 pounds of chains were padlocked to his body, the plexiglass coffin was lowered 6 feet into the ground, and then the dirt began falling, and 7 tons of cement followed. Now, what made this stand so unforgiving was how small the margin of error really was. Shirk calculated the coffin would collapse roughly 60 seconds after the cement reached ground level, so he planned to escape in 15.
I'll make this. I got a bad feeling about this thing. Bad feeling. But who knows, I may go down there and decide to quit here in a few seconds.
But everyone there ignored one crucial fact. On the morning of the burial, the conditions had changed. Rain had fallen overnight. The dirt was heavier, and to top it all off, the cement mixture had more rocks than his test runs. So Shirk's estimate had many variables he never considered. Before Shirk could escape, the coffin collapsed.
What's gonna happen? It's starting to collapse. I can feel the...
He was now buried under tons of weight, unable to hear anything above him. Meanwhile, above ground, the backhoe operator began digging. Beneath the dirt, Shirk created a small pocket near his face, pushed one arm upward through the mud, and waited. When the crew finally pulled him out, Shirk was covered in mud, gasping, and barely conscious. He had swallowed a lot of dirt trying to breathe.
The problem was I knew I wasn't going to be able to get up through the dirt, let alone the cement, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't succeed in the escape, but I did get away with my life, which I consider a lucky one.
Bill Shirk survived, but only because the coffin collapsed in the wrong direction, creating the air pocket that saved his life by accident.
Strengthen your math and computer science skills? Try
Human chandelier.
We have an update on the terrifying fall at the circus in Rhode Island that injured 9 performers, some of them critically. Investigators say they have zeroed in on what went wrong. We get our report tonight from NBC's Ron Mott in Providence.
On May 4th, 2014, 8 acrobats were suspended 40 feet in the air at a Ringling Brothers circus in Rhode Island. They were hanging by nothing but their hair. Then, a single steel clip snapped. The act was called the Human Chandelier. 8 women from the Medeiros troupe were spinning in a rotating aerial formation held aloft by braids woven into the rigging. Below them were families, children, and a packed arena at the Dunkin' Donuts Center in Providence. What made the setup so fragile was that the entire apparatus was connected to a single load-bearing carabiner, a steel clip rated to hold 10,000 pounds. The performers weighed roughly 1,500 combined, so the clip should have held. However, the carabiner wasn't loaded the way the manufacturer required. It was loaded sideways at an angle that created pressure along the wrong axis.
In the case here in Providence, the carabiner was loaded like this, sideways.
The moment the weight shifted, the carabiner didn't bend. Instead, it shattered. 8 bodies dropped nearly 40 feet. They collided midair with a 9th performer positioned below and hit the arena floor in a pile. Emergency responders rushed in immediately. The performers were found crumpled on top of each other, some motionless, others writhing in pain. Paramedics stabilized their necks and spines on site before loading them onto stretchers and transporting all 9 to nearby hospitals. As one can imagine, the injuries were catastrophic. Broken necks, spinal fractures, shattered limbs, and one performer with ribs that had pierced her liver.
Multiple fractures, multiple surgeries in their limbs, in their legs, in their arms, in their necks. very, very serious injuries.
Troop leader Victoria Medeiros and performer Diana Costa were listed in critical condition, with Medeiros initially unable to feel her legs. It took months of rehabilitation before either woman could walk again, and even then, the recovery was far from complete. OSHA's investigation confirmed that the carabiner failed because the rigging had been set up incorrectly, resulting in the circus's parent company being fined $7,000. In 2020, the acrobats reached a $52.5 million settlement, finally putting a price on the night that ended their careers. The Russian Swing. For 22 years, the Russian Swing Act at the TNE's Spectacular Circus had been performed without a single incident. Until May 18, 2014, in Londrina, Brazil. The act uses a giant pendulum to launch performers 8 to 9 meters up into the air before they land in a safety net below. 28-year-old Wilson Gomez Barreto had been one of its performers. He had done the routine hundreds of times. However, that night, something went wrong with the trajectory. Wilson launched too far, cleared the net entirely, and dropped straight onto the hard stage floor. Medics rushed in quickly, and even a doctor from the crowd ran to the stage to help.
O rapaz levantó de una manera que fue inédito. Todo el mundo ficó sorpreso. ¿Por qué fez isso? Porque ele não foi ni así, ni así, ni así, ni así, ni así. Ele foi assim. Sobe, não sei.
Let in 0 meters, okay.
8, 9 metros, con impulso.
But much to everyone's surprise, Wilson was conscious and alert, complaining only about his elbow. For a moment, the worst appeared to have been avoided. But that relief was short-lived. While the circus replaced his position and continued performing, doctors at the hospital found what no one on that stage could see: a severe traumatic brain injury. In fact, it had progressed so much that it was too late to do anything. From then on, Wilson's condition deteriorated rapidly. 48 hours after standing up and talking to paramedics, Wilson Gomez Barreto was pronounced dead. The first show after his death included a tribute. The director and performers stood on the same stage where Wilson fell and held a moment of silence. Level 6. The Ponytail Crossing.
जो सृष्टि करेगा ये हमारा जो इंडिया का रिकॉर्ड है कोई दुनिया को हम छूटने नहीं देंगे.
On April 28, 2013, at the Teesta River in West Bengal, India, the crowd gathered to watch Sailendra Nath Roy attempt something no one has ever done before.
Ne parmaksā, lai vai kas. Tu esi pelnījis superkombo. Nogaršo jauno siera cūkaļas burgeru superkombo.
Sailendra was a Guinness World Record holder who had already pulled a railway locomotive 2.5 meters using nothing but his hair. However, this time things were different. The Indian daredevil prepared to cross 600 feet of open air on a zip line attached only to his ponytail. The crew had the ceremony a cable stretched across the Tista River 70 feet above the water, a pulley system attached to his ponytail, and a life jacket in case he fell. But there were still several red flags hiding in plain sight, like no backup safety line, Roy using no harness, and no emergency rescue team in case something went wrong. To top it off, the BBC reported that Roy didn't even have permission to attempt the stunt. Still, thousands gathered below, phones in their hands and chants on their tongues as Roy clipped in and started moving. For the first few minutes, everything went exactly as planned. Roy glided smoothly across the wire, suspended by his ponytail, body swinging freely beneath him. And just when it seemed like the record was about to break, Roy stopped moving. Midway across the river, roughly 300 feet from either side, the pulley mechanism had jammed. The man was now stranded 70 feet above the water, his entire body weight suspended by the hair on his head, with no way forward and no way back. The crowd didn't understand what was happening. They kept cheering, assuming the pause was only to create a dramatic moment, and he would eventually start moving again. But only Roy knew the truth. With each passing minute, the pressure on his scalp was increasing. Roy was now in excruciating pain, and the only way to relieve the tension was to manually pull himself along the cable while his full body weight dangled from his hair. So that's what Roy did. For nearly 20 minutes, Cylinder Roy hung suspended over the river, desperately trying to pull himself forward hand over hand along the wire. Now, the human scalp isn't designed to support full body weight. The constant tension tears at the skin, pulls at the follicles, and creates searing pain that radiates across the entire skull. And all of that was happening 70 feet in the air with a crowd watching below and no help coming. Eventually, Roy's body gave out. He suddenly went limp. At that moment, nobody knew if he was simply unconscious or dead. It took rescue teams nearly 45 minutes to lower Roy from the wire and transport him to a hospital. There, the doctors confirmed what everyone feared. Roy was dead on arrival. According to the medical reports, the stress had triggered a massive heart attack while Roy was still hanging midair. Viewers later questioned whether having a second safety line so he could cut his hair while still staying attached could have led to a different outcome. But a backup would have defeated the entire purpose. After all, the danger was the main attraction. 20 feet high.
A Cirque du Soleil performance in Florida, taking a deadly turn. An aerial is thrown during a performance. As the audience watched, he did not survive. ABC's Whit Johnson has the details.
A performer was swinging through the air on aerial straps when his grip suddenly failed. It was 38-year-old Jan Arnaud, and he was performing in Cirque du Soleil's Volta show inside the big top tent at the Tampa Greyhound track. Arnaud had practiced the routine for 2 months. Earlier that same day, he had successfully performed that exact stunt without incident. However, on March 17, 2018, it was only his second time performing the routine live. Aerial straps require performers to be suspended by 2 fabric loops, relying entirely on grip strength and body control. On top of that, they have nothing beneath them to break a fall. According to Cirque du Soleil's CEO, safety nets and harnesses are used when deemed appropriate. So, for Arnaud's routine, the company didn't feel a net was needed, especially when there had never been a major incident in many years. Well, before anyone could react, Arnaud's grip slipped from the rope. He fell and hit his head on the ground with such force that it was audible throughout the entire venue. Medics quickly rushed in, and the show ended abruptly with Arnaud being transported in critical condition to Tampa General Hospital. The very next day, on March 18th, 2018, the athlete succumbed to his injuries. Cirque du Soleil canceled the remainder of its Tampa performances, but canceling doesn't answer the question of why a net wasn't deemed appropriate for a man performing 20 feet above concrete. The transfer. At the 2011 Selfridge Air Show in Michigan, a wing walker attempted to transfer from an airplane to a helicopter mid-flight. And 75,000 spectators were about to watch it turn into a disaster. Todd Green was the son of legendary Hall of Fame stuntman Eddie the Grip Green, and he had spent over 25 years mastering the craft. His signature move was deceptively simple in concept. Stand on the wing of a biplane, wait for a helicopter to descend into position, then grab onto its skid and transfer mid-air. Now, when you're reversing across a wire on a handlebarless bicycle, it delays every balance correction by a fraction of a second. And for Shavaro, that fraction was enough. Beneath him was he dropped 200 feet straight down in full view of the crowd. The fall was so fast that many spectators didn't immediately register what had happened. Todd Green died instantly from multiple blunt force injuries.
It was a stunt without a safety net gone horribly wrong.
The plane was so low you could see his shirt actually shaking, and you could see it was just too windy.
Selfridge Air Show officials later announced that wing-walking transfer stunts would be permanently banned from all future events. But for the thousands who watched that afternoon, the memory is sure to leave a mark. Level 7. Backward. A Colombian acrobat successfully pedals a bicycle across a tightrope 13 feet above the stage. But things went wrong when he attempts to cross backwards. The acrobat was Sixto Octavio Shavaro, a 44-year-old veteran performer who had spent years mastering extreme high-wire acts across Russian circuits. The handlebarless bicycle crossing was his signature move, but that day he was attempting the stunt in reverse for the first time. Now, when you're reversing across a wire on a handlebarless bicycle, it delays every balance correction by a fraction of a second. And for Shavaro, that fraction was enough. Beneath him was no safety net and no harness, so Shavaro fell head first on the concrete hard floor. Families who had come for entertainment instead witnessed a potential death. But what happened next may have sealed Shavaro's fate. Staff members lifted his limp body without a stretcher or spinal precautions, handling him the way someone might carry a drunk friend at a bar. For a head-first fall, that kind of movement turns survivable trauma into certain death. Shavaro was rushed to a hospital, but pronounced dead shortly after. To top it all, his family in Colombia learned about the death through a nephew working at the circus.
Él tenía experiencia, ya llevaba en Rusia, llevaba como 2 años que estaban allá, que nos ayude la Cancillería para repatriar el cadáver de él, para darle cristiana sepultura, porque la mamá está allá, los hermanos, y pues ellos son de muy bajos recursos.
They couldn't afford to bring Shavaro's body home, and were left begging the government to help just to bury him. The Glass Cage. At the 2017 Mad Cool Festival in Madrid, a performer was dancing in a glass cage suspended 100 feet above ground. But while the crowd was cheering, his safety line suddenly failed. The performer was 42-year-old Pedro Aunion Monroy, an aerial dance pioneer known across Europe for his meticulous attention to safety. But that night in Madrid, something clearly went wrong. Pedro was performing a 30-minute aerial act scheduled between Alt J and Green Day. The routine required him to switch from a short safety line to a longer bungee cord mid-performance, a transition he had done before. However, the connection wasn't secure. When Pedro jumped, the cord didn't catch and he plummeted 100 feet, striking the ground near the main stage. Emergency responders reached him within 10 seconds. Paramedics spent nearly 30 minutes attempting resuscitation, but Pedro Onion Monroy was pronounced dead at the scene.
A horrific fall in front of a stunned crowd, an acrobat plunging to his death in the middle of his performance.
At least one of the bands scheduled to perform today backed out after learning of the accident. A special tribute was held in honor of the acrobat who lost his life.
Disturbingly, the festival kept going. Organizers never told the crowd what had happened. Green Day took the stage shortly after and performed their entire set as if nothing had happened. In fact, even security guards told people who asked that he was fine. The truth didn't spread until after the show ended.
Pero lo impactante fue eso, de repente ver cómo cae, no saber si era parte del espectáculo, porque ni había colchoneta abajo ni nada.
Organizers later justified their decision by claiming that,
by the way, it's for adults only for a reason.
stopping the festival abruptly could have caused a dangerous crowd surge.
Muchos coreógrafos en danza contemporánea que hemos trabajado con él y él ante todo la seguridad y que si nos sintiésemos seguros ante esta nueva situación, pues era algo primordial en su trabajo.
But the venue's reputation had already been tainted. On top of the world. At the 2013 Vectron Daytona Air Show in Ohio, a wing walker is strapped to the outside of a biplane flying upside down. It was Jane Wicker, known for performing without a safety harness, hanging off an aircraft mid-flight while tens of thousands watched from below. Her signature routine, called On Top of the World, involved sitting upright on the underside of a wing while the plane rolled inverted above her.
She was known for her bold routines, including her signature move of hanging upside down beneath the wing by her feet, or sitting calmly on the underside of the plane whilst it rolled inverted.
That afternoon, Wicker was performing alongside pilot Charlie Schwenker in a 1941 Boeing Stearman biplane named Aurora. Schwenker was a seasoned aerobatic pilot with decades of experience. Together, they had done this routine before several times. Only this time, something wasn't right. The plane descended lower than expected. It was flying too slow, and as it rolled inverted for the pass, the biplane's wing dipped toward the runway.
Keep an eye on Charlie. Watch this. Jane Wicker sitting on top of the world.
The biplane cartwheeled violently, broke apart on impact, and erupted into a fireball. Both Wicker and Schwenker were killed instantly. Seconds before the crash, the atmosphere had been festive. The announcer had just introduced the act, and several families with their kids were pressed against the fence. One 8-year-old in the crowd later described the scene as so terrifying that she couldn't stop crying and never returned to another air show again. The NTSB investigation attributed the crash to pilot error. Schwenker had attempted a modified version of the maneuver at dangerously low altitude and airspeed. A miscalculation that left no room for recovery. One 8-year-old in the crowd left no room for recovery. The air show resumed the following day as a tribute to Wicker and Schwenker, but for those who had watched it live, no tribute could undo what they had witnessed. These talent show accidents were truly disturbing. But have you ever wondered what goes on behind accidents that happen on TV? Find out in the most disturbing TV accidents iceberg.
Bye.